The emergency beacon cut through the void like a scream in the dark. Its signal reached the outer rim of human space 3 days after the attack began, carrying with it the desperate plea of a dying civilization. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, her weathered hands gripping the command rail as she studied the translation algorithms working to decode the alien message. Around her, the bridge crew worked in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the red glow of combat lighting. "Ma'am, we've got a partial translation," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications station. His voice carried the weight of what he'd discovered. "It's from something called the Kethmoran Republic. They're under attack by something they call the Void Devourers. According to this message, they've lost 14 star systems in the past month." Sarah's jaw tightened. The Kethmoran were one of the older galactic civilizations, known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and advanced technology. If something could overwhelm them so completely, it posed a threat to every species in the galaxy. "What's their current position?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer would complicate everything. "Approximately 47 light years from our current position, ma'am. Deep in the neutral zone." The neutral zone, a buffer of empty space that had separated humanity from the rest of galactic civilization for nearly 2 centuries. Most alien species had insisted on its creation after humanity's first contact went spectacularly wrong. The galactic community had learned quickly that humans were unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Where other species had evolved on peaceful worlds with gentle climates and abundant resources, humanity had clawed its way to the stars from a planet that seemed determined to kill them at every opportunity. Earth was a death world by galactic standards, with violent weather, deadly predators, and natural disasters that would have wiped out most civilizations before they could develop writing, let alone spaceflight. The result was a species that the galaxy found both fascinating and terrifying. Humans could survive in environments that would kill most other sentients within minutes. They possessed an almost supernatural ability to adapt, fight, and survive against impossible odds. More importantly, they had developed military technology and tactics that most civilizations couldn't even comprehend. "Signal the fleet," Sarah ordered, her decision made. "We're changing course for Kethmoran space." Her first officer, Commander Jackson Hayes, stepped closer to her position. His scarred face bore the marks of their last major engagement against pirate forces near the Kepler colonies. "Ma'am, regulations require approval from Fleet Command for any action in the neutral zone." Sarah turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the determination that had carried her through 30 years of military service. "Commander, by the time we get approval from Earth, there might not be a Kethmoran Republic left to save. Sometimes you have to make the hard choice and live with the consequences." The Retribution was the flagship of the Third Fleet, one of humanity's newest and most powerful naval formations. Built in the orbital shipyards above Mars, the fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and over 100 smaller vessels. Each ship was a marvel of human engineering, designed not just for exploration, but for war. Human military doctrine had evolved from centuries of conflict on Earth, refined by their experience fighting pirates, raiders, and the occasional aggressive alien species that tested humanity's resolve. Where other species relied on shields and energy weapons, humans had developed kinetic weapons that could punch through any known defensive system. Where aliens used elegant formations and predictable tactics, humans employed chaos, misdirection, and overwhelming firepower. The fleet began its course change, the massive engines of the capital ships lighting up the darkness of space. As they accelerated toward Kethmoran space, Sarah reviewed what little intelligence they had on the Void Devourers. The reports were fragmented and often contradictory, but a pattern emerged that chilled her to the bone. The Void Devourers appeared to be a nomadic fleet of unknown origin, traveling from system to system and consuming everything in their path. They showed no interest in negotiation or conquest. They simply arrived, destroyed all resistance, and harvested the planets down to their cores before moving on. What made them particularly dangerous was their apparent immunity to conventional weapons. Kethmoran forces had reported that energy weapons seemed to have little effect on the invaders' ships. Their vessels appeared to absorb energy attacks and grow stronger from them. "Ma'am, we're receiving another transmission," Rodriguez announced. "This one's much weaker than the first." The bridge fell silent as the alien voice filled the air, speaking in the melodic language of the Kethmoran. The translation algorithms worked frantically to convert the words into something humans could understand. "This is Admiral Veltar of the Kethmoran Defense Fleet. Our core worlds are under direct assault. The Void Devourers have broken through our final defensive line. We estimate we have perhaps days before our homeworld falls. If anyone receives this message, please remember us. Remember that we tried to stand against the darkness." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Sarah stared at the tactical display showing their route to Kethmoran space. Even at maximum speed, they were still days away. "How long until we reach their space?" she asked. 62 hours at current speed," the navigation officer replied. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, running the calculations in her head. If the Kethmoran homeworld was already under attack, they might arrive to find nothing but empty space and the wreckage of a dead civilization. "Signal engineering," she ordered. "Tell them to push the engines past Redline if they have to. And send a message to the fleet. Tell them we're about to find out what happens when someone threatens innocent people while humanity is watching." Commander Hayes moved to stand beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Sarah, we're taking a hell of a risk here. If these Void Devourers are as dangerous as the reports suggest, we might be flying into a massacre." Sarah's smile was cold and predatory, the expression of someone who had spent her entire career turning impossible odds in humanity's favor. "Jackson, in my experience, the galaxy keeps underestimating what humans are capable of when they're properly motivated. Maybe it's time to remind everyone why other species insisted on the neutral zone in the first place." The fleet surged forward through the darkness, their engines burning bright against the void. Behind them, emergency communications raced back toward Earth, informing Fleet Command of their unauthorized mission. Ahead lay the unknown, and possibly the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. But Sarah Chun had not risen to command the Third Fleet by backing down from impossible fights. As she watched the stars shift on the main display, she began planning humanity's introduction to the Void Devourers. It was going to be a meeting they would never forget. The Kethmoran had called for help, and help was coming. The question wasn't whether humanity would fight. The question was whether the galaxy was ready to see what happened when the children of a death world went to war against something that thought it was unstoppable. In 62 hours, everyone would have their answer. The Kethmoran homeworld of Thesha Prime hung like a wounded jewel against the star field, its once beautiful blue and green surface now scarred with the angry red glow of burning cities. The Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their sensors immediately detecting the massive alien vessels that surrounded the planet like predators circling wounded prey. Captain Chen stood transfixed by the sight before her. The Void Devourer ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They appeared to be grown rather than built, their organic-looking hulls pulsing with veins of dark energy. Each vessel was enormous, easily dwarfing even humanity's largest dreadnoughts. Worst of all, there were dozens of them. "Jesus Christ," whispered Commander Hayes, his voice barely audible over the bridge's tactical displays. No wonder the Kethmoran couldn't stop them. Lieutenant Rodriguez's hands flew over his console as he processed the sensor data. "Ma'am, I'm reading massive energy signatures from those ships. They're actually feeding on something. The planetary core is showing signs of destabilization." Sarah's blood ran cold. The reports had been true. The Void Devourers weren't just conquering worlds, they were literally consuming them. Life signs on the surface? Scattered pockets of survivors, but the readings are weak and getting weaker by the hour. The tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Park, looked up from her station with grim determination. "Ma'am, I count 43 enemy vessels of various sizes. Their smallest ships are still larger than our heavy cruisers. Conventional wisdom would suggest immediate retreat." Sarah smiled, the expression holding no warmth whatsoever. "Conventional wisdom has never met humanity before, Lieutenant Commander. Signal the fleet. Battle formation Delta 7. We're going in." The human formation spread across space like a pack of wolves preparing to hunt. Unlike the elegant, symmetrical formations favored by most galactic navies, human battle formations were designed around one principle: controlled chaos. Ships moved in seemingly random patterns that would confuse enemy targeting systems while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. As the fleet closed the distance to the planet, the first Void Devourer ships began to turn toward them. The alien vessels moved with fluid grace, their organic hulls rippling as they oriented their weapons toward the approaching humans. "They're scanning us," Rodriguez reported. "Some kind of energy pulse. It feels almost probing." Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd read the reports from other civilizations that had faced these creatures. The Void Devourers seemed to analyze their prey before attacking, adapting their tactics to counter whatever defenses they encountered. Against energy shields and plasma weapons, they had proven nearly invincible. Fortunately, humanity had taken a different approach to warfare. "All ships, this is Retribution Actual," Sarah announced over the fleet communication channel. "You all know why we're here. Those alien ships have been bullying civilizations that never learned to fight dirty. Well, today they're about to get a lesson in Deathworlder tactics. Remember your training, trust your shipmates, and show these bastards what happens when you threaten innocent people." The first Void Devourer vessel opened fire, unleashing streams of dark energy that would have devastated any conventional galactic warship. The beams struck the human formation with devastating force, only to pass harmlessly through empty space. The human ships had scattered at the last possible moment, their pilots executing maneuvers that would have been impossible for most species to survive. "Now," Sarah shouted. The human fleet opened fire, but instead of energy weapons, they unleashed volleys of kinetic projectiles. Railgun rounds, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, tore through space toward the enemy vessels. The Void Devourers, expecting energy weapons they could absorb, had no defense against simple physics. The first round struck the lead alien vessel, punching through its organic hull with devastating effect. Dark ichor sprayed into space as the creature ship convulsed in what could only be described as pain. "Direct hit," Park shouted from her station. "Their hull appears to be vulnerable to kinetic impact." But the Void Devourers were quick to adapt. The damaged ship began to regenerate, its wounds closing with disturbing speed. More concerning, the other alien vessels began to change their formations, spreading out to minimize the effectiveness of mass kinetic strikes. Sarah watched the enemy adaptation with professional interest. Most galactic species would have continued using the same failed tactics until they were destroyed. These creatures were learning from the exchange, which made them far more dangerous than simple mindless predators. "All ships, Pattern Omega," she ordered. "Time to show them something they've never seen before." Pattern Omega was humanity's answer to adaptive enemies. Instead of maintaining formation and trading shots, the human ships began to move in completely unpredictable patterns. Some vessels accelerated directly toward the enemy lines, others pulled back and provided covering fire, while still others moved perpendicular to the battle, striking at unexpected angles. The Void Devourer ships tried to adapt to the new pattern, but there was no pattern to adapt to. Each human captain was making independent tactical decisions based on local conditions, creating a battle that was impossible to predict or counter. Captain Lisa Torres of the destroyer UES Fury dove her ship beneath the orbital plane, using a shattered Kethmoran station as cover while she lined up a shot on one of the smaller alien vessels. "This is Fury. I have a clear shot on the enemy's flank. Firing now." Her ship's main railgun spoke, sending a tungsten penetrator through the alien vessel's midsection. The creature ship writhed in apparent agony, its bioluminescent patterns flickering as internal systems failed. Meanwhile, the heavy cruiser UES Thunderchild had positioned itself directly between the alien fleet and the planet, its captain determined to prevent any more ships from reaching the surface. The ship's multiple railgun turrets fired in sequence, creating a wall of kinetic destruction that forced several Void Devourer vessels to break off their planet-side operations. But the aliens were not passive targets. As they adapted to human tactics, they began to coordinate their responses. Groups of Void Devourer ships started working together, using their energy weapons to create overlapping fields of destruction that even human pilots couldn't navigate through. The destroyer UES Valiant took a direct hit as it tried to break through one such field. The ship's hull buckled under the alien energy assault, and Captain Rodriguez watched in horror as it tumbled out of formation, trailing atmosphere and debris. "Valiant is down," he reported. "I'm reading escape pod launches, but the ship is finished." Sarah's expression hardened. The loss of any human ship was unacceptable, but she couldn't let emotion cloud her tactical judgment. "Signal the rescue ships to recover those pods. All other vessels, continue the attack." The battle raged for hours, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The Void Devourer's ability to regenerate damage made them incredibly difficult to destroy, while their energy weapons could devastate any human ship that couldn't avoid them. But humanity's unpredictable tactics and kinetic weapons were clearly causing problems for creatures that had grown accustomed to easy victories. As the fight continued, Sarah began to notice something interesting about the alien behavior. The Void Devourer ships seemed to be drawing energy not just from their weapons, but from the planet below. The more damage they took, the more aggressively they fed on Thesha Prime's core. "Rodriguez, are you seeing this energy transfer?" she asked. The communications officer nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am. They're using the planet as a power source. If we keep damaging them, they'll drain the core completely. The whole planet will collapse." Sarah stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through the implications. The Void Devourers had found the perfect defense against any civilized species. Attack them, and they would destroy the very thing you were trying to protect. It was a strategy that would paralyze any normal military force. But humanity had never been accused of being normal. "Signal all ships," Sarah ordered, her voice carrying across the fleet communication channel. "New priority. We're not here to trade shots with these bastards. We're here to save every living soul on that planet. Time for Plan B." Commander Hayes looked at her with confusion. "Ma'am, what's Plan B?" Sarah's smile was the expression of someone who had grown up on a world where survival meant thinking outside conventional parameters. "We're going to do something these creatures have never encountered before. We're going to fight a human war." The implications of her words sent a chill through the bridge crew. Throughout the galaxy, there were stories about what happened when humans abandoned conventional military doctrine and fought according to their own rules. Most species preferred to believe those stories were exaggerated. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The human fleet suddenly dispersed across the system in a pattern that defied all conventional military logic. Ships that had been fighting in coordinated formations broke away from the main battle, scattering like leaves in a hurricane. To the Void Devourers, it must have looked like a retreat or complete breakdown in command structure. Captain Chin watched from the bridge of the Retribution as her carefully orchestrated chaos began to unfold. "All ships, Operation Deathworld is now in effect. Remember, we're not trying to win a clean battle. We're trying to survive and take these bastards with us." Operation Deathworld was humanity's ultimate contingency plan, developed from their experience on Earth, where survival often meant breaking every rule of civilized warfare. Instead of trying to fight the enemy on their terms, humans would turn the entire battlefield into a death trap. The destroyer UES Mongoose was the first to demonstrate the new tactics. Captain Williams had positioned his ship near a cluster of asteroid debris left over from the system's formation. As 3 Void Devourer vessels closed in on his position, he fired his railguns not at the enemy's ships, but at the largest asteroids around them. The kinetic rounds shattered the rocky bodies, sending clouds of high-velocity debris toward the alien vessels. The Void Devourers, expecting another direct attack they could absorb or regenerate from, had no defense against thousands of stone fragments moving at orbital speeds. The alien ships convulsed as the improvised shrapnel tore through their organic hulls, their regenerative abilities overwhelmed by the sheer volume of damage. One vessel listed heavily, dark ichor streaming from countless puncture wounds, while another began to break apart as its internal structure failed. "Mongoose actual to fleet," Captain Williams announced with grim satisfaction. "Asteroid fragmentation is highly effective. These things might be able to heal from energy weapons, but they can't regenerate faster than they can be shredded." Across the system, other human captains began implementing their own variations of Deathworld tactics. The heavy cruiser UES Predator used its mining lasers to destabilize a small moon. turning it into a massive kinetic weapon that crushed two Void Devourer ships when it broke apart. The destroyer UES Viper fired its emergency reactor fuel into space and then ignited it with a precisely aimed railgun round, creating a plasma explosion that engulfed an entire group of alien vessels. But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Commander Sarah Park, captain of the light cruiser UES Darwin, had noticed something that the larger ships had missed. The Void Devourers weren't just feeding on the planet's core energy, they were also drawing power from their own damaged vessels. Fleet Command, this is Darwin, she transmitted. I've identified a critical vulnerability in enemy tactics. They're cannibalistic. When one of their ships is heavily damaged, the others feed on it to repair themselves. If we can exploit that behavior. Sarah Chen's eyes widened as she understood the implications. All ships, new priority. We're not trying to destroy these vessels. We're trying to wound them badly enough that their own fleet consumes them. The human fleet began a new type of attack, one that would have been considered barbaric by galactic standards. Instead of trying to destroy the Void Devourer ships outright, they focused on crippling attacks designed to leave the alien vessels helpless but still alive. Railgun rounds targeted propulsion systems and weapon nodes, while precisely placed explosives severed the organic connections that seemed to link different parts of each ship. The results were horrifying and effective. Crippled Void Devourer vessels, unable to defend themselves or contribute to the battle, began to emit distress signals that attracted their own kind. Like sharks sensing blood in the water, the healthy alien ships turned on their wounded companions, their feeding tendrils extending to drain energy from the damaged vessels. What followed was a nightmare of cannibalistic destruction as the Void Devourer fleet began to consume itself. Ships that had been formidable predators moments before became helpless prey for their own kind, their hulls collapsing as their life force was drained away. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez from his station. "They're eating each other alive." Commander Hayes shook his head in disturbed admiration. "That's the most ruthless tactical exploitation I've ever seen." Sarah Chun watched the alien fleet tear itself apart with professional detachment. On Earth, we learned early that sometimes the best way to defeat a predator is to turn its own nature against it. These creatures are parasites on a galactic scale. They've just never encountered prey that could fight back using their own methods. But even as the Void Devourer fleet cannibalized itself, the remaining ships continued their assault on Thesha Prime. The planet's core was becoming increasingly unstable, and Sarah could see on the sensors that they had perhaps an hour before complete collapse. "All ships with landing capability, begin immediate evacuation operations," she ordered. "Everyone else, keep those remaining aliens busy. We're not leaving anyone behind." The human ships capable of atmospheric flight dove toward the planet's surface, their crews working frantically to locate and rescue the scattered Kethmoran survivors. It was a dangerous operation. The planetary surface was racked with seismic activity, and the remaining Void Devourer ships were still trying to intercept the rescue vessels. Captain Torres in the UES Fury had landed near what appeared to be a refugee camp hidden in the ruins of a major Kethmoran city. Her ship's sensors detected nearly 300 life signs, but the survivors were trapped beneath collapsed buildings and unable to reach the landing zone. "This is Fury to Fleet," she transmitted. "I've got survivors, but they're trapped. I need heavy lifting equipment or—" Her transmission was cut off as a Void Devourer ship broke through the orbital battle and began descending toward the surface. The alien vessel was clearly intent on preventing the rescue operation, its energy weapons charging for what would undoubtedly be a devastating attack on the refugee camp. "Fury, get out of there," Sarah ordered. "You can't fight that thing alone." Torres' response was calm and determined. "Negative, Fleet Command. I've got 300 civilians down here who will die if I abandon them. Sometimes you have to make the hard choice." The UES Fury lifted off from the surface just as the Void Devourer ship opened fire. Instead of fleeing, Torres turned her destroyer toward the massive alien vessel in what appeared to be a suicidal attack run. But, at the last moment, she triggered her ship's emergency systems, ejecting the entire reactor core directly into the alien vessel's path. The resulting explosion lit up the planet's atmosphere like a second sun. The Void Devourer's ship, caught completely off guard by the unconventional attack, was vaporized instantly. The blast wave from the reactor detonation also cleared away the debris trapping the Kethmoran survivors, allowing rescue teams from other human ships to reach them safely. Fury report. Sarah called over the communications channel. Torres' voice crackled through the static, tired but triumphant. Fury actual. Ship is crippled but intact. We're running on backup power only, but the refugees are safe. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't expect. Throughout the system, similar scenes played out as human crews demonstrated the flexibility and resourcefulness that had carried their species from the caves of Earth to the stars. They used everything from mining equipment to emergency supplies as weapons, turning the conventional rules of space warfare upside down. The few remaining Void Devourer ships, having consumed most of their own fleet, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fight by any recognizable rules. Human vessels appeared from unexpected angles, used the system's own debris field as cover and camouflage, and employed weapons and tactics that defied every known principle of galactic warfare. Most disturbing of all, from the alien perspective, was the humans' complete willingness to sacrifice their own ships and crews to protect beings they had never met before. The Void Devourers had encountered thousands of species across the galaxy, but none that would choose mutual destruction over abandoning strangers to their fate. As the last Void Devourer ship fell victim to another improvised human attack, this one involving a cargo hauler filled with antimatter storage pods, Sarah Chun allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The immediate battle was won, but the war was far from over. Fleet status report, she ordered. Commander Hayes consulted his tactical display. 14 ships lost or crippled, but recoverable. Casualty reports are still coming in, but initial estimates suggest we've lost about 800 crew members. However, we've successfully evacuated over 12,000 Kethmoran civilians, and the planet's core has stabilized now that the feeding has stopped. Sarah nodded grimly. 800 human lives lost, but 12,000 innocent civilians saved. By any military standard, it was a victory, but the cost reminded her why humanity fought so hard to avoid conflicts in the first place. Signal the evacuation ships, she ordered. We're taking these survivors back to human space where they'll be safe. And send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we've made contact with a new enemy that threatens every species in the galaxy. It's time for humanity to have a conversation with our galactic neighbors about the real nature of the universe we all share. The Third Fleet began its long journey back to human space, their cargo holds filled with grateful refugees, and their databases containing tactical information about an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Behind them, Thesha Prime slowly began to heal from its wounds, its core stabilizing and its surface cooling. But Sarah Chin knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, more Void Devourer fleets were consuming other worlds, other civilizations. Today's victory had been won through surprise and human unpredictability, advantages they wouldn't have again. The next phase of this war would require something even more dangerous than Deathworld tactics. It would require humanity to do what they did best. Unite the galaxy's species into a force capable of fighting monsters that fed on entire worlds. The question was whether the rest of the galaxy was ready to learn how to fight like humans. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime had never hosted a gathering quite like this one. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their environmental suits and atmospheric bubbles, their attention focused on the human delegation that had requested this emergency session. Admiral Sarah Chun stood at the center of the Great Hall, still wearing her battle-scarred uniform from the Thesha Prime engagement. Around her sat the rescued Kethmoran survivors, including Admiral Veltar, whose testimony had already shaken the assembled delegates to their core. The Kethmoran admiral was a tall, graceful being with silver-blue skin and large, expressive eyes that currently held depths of trauma that would take years to heal. When he spoke, his melodic voice carried the weight of a species that had lost everything. "Honored delegates," Veltar said. His words translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. What Admiral Chin's forces accomplished at Thesha Prime was nothing short of miraculous. In 36 hours, they did what our entire defense fleet could not accomplish in 3 weeks. They drove back the Void Devourers and saved thousands of my people. The chamber erupted in the various sounds that different species made to express skepticism and concern. The Alteri representative, a crystalline being that communicated through harmonic resonance, chimed in with obvious doubt. With respect to our Kethmoran colleagues, the Alteri delegate said, "We find these claims difficult to accept. No species has successfully resisted the Void Devourers. The humans themselves admit to losing multiple vessels in this engagement." Sarah stepped forward, her expression calm but determined. "Honorable delegates, we're not here to boast about our victory. We're here to warn you that the Void Devourers represent an existential threat to every civilization in this galaxy. And, more importantly, we're here to offer our assistance in developing a unified defense strategy." The silence that followed was profound. For 2 centuries, the Galactic Council had maintained the neutral zone specifically to avoid dealing with humanity's unpredictable nature. Most species found human culture and military doctrine disturbing, even frightening. The idea of accepting human help was almost as terrifying as facing the Void Devourers alone. The Zalani ambassador, a tall insectoid being with compound eyes, spoke next. "Admiral Chun, while we appreciate your intervention at Thesha Prime, we must address the fundamental issue. Human military tactics are considered barbaric by galactic standards. Your species has a documented history of using weapons and strategies that violate every principle of civilized warfare." Sarah's smile was cold and predatory. "Ambassador, civilized warfare is a luxury that only exists when both sides agree to follow the same rules. The Void Devourers don't recognize any rules except survival of the fittest. They consume entire worlds and everything living on them. If you want to fight them with civilized tactics, you'll lose just like every other species they've encountered. But surely there must be alternative methods," pressed the Therion delegate, a tall humanoid with pale blue skin. "Your tactics at Thesha Prime involve turning the enemy against itself, using their own feeding behavior as a weapon. This seems unnecessarily cruel." Commander Hayes, who had accompanied Sarah to the council session, leaned forward in his seat. "Delegate, with respect, would you prefer we had allowed the Void Devourers to complete their consumption of Thesha Prime? Sometimes survival requires making choices that aren't pretty." The debate continued for hours, with various delegates expressing concerns about human involvement in galactic defense. Some worried that humanity's aggressive nature would destabilize the careful diplomatic balance that had maintained peace for centuries. Others questioned whether humans could be trusted with information about other species' military capabilities and homeworld locations. Finally, the eldest member of the council spoke. The ancients were one of the first species to achieve interstellar flight, and their representative was nearly 1,000 years old. When the ancients spoke, their voice carried the weight of millennia of experience. "Young warriors," the ancients said, addressing the human delegation, "your species concerns us not because of your violence, but because of your unpredictability. In our long history, we have observed that species capable of great destruction are also capable of great protection. But the choice between the two is often decided by circumstances beyond anyone's control." Sarah bowed respectfully to the ancient delegate. "Honored elder, we understand your concerns. Humanity has made mistakes in the past, and we've learned from them. But we've also learned that sometimes the choice isn't between violence and peace. Sometimes it's between fighting to protect what matters and watching everything you care about be destroyed." The ancient studied her for a long moment before continuing. "What do you propose, Admiral Chen?" "A joint task force," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Human military expertise combined with galactic industrial capacity and scientific knowledge. We share our tactical innovations, you share your advanced technology. Together, we develop strategies and weapons capable of stopping the Void Devourers before they consume any more worlds." The chamber fell silent as the delegates considered this proposal. The idea of formal military cooperation with humanity was unprecedented, and many species found the concept deeply unsettling. The Kethmoran Admiral Veltar rose slowly from his seat. "Honored delegates, I have seen what the Void Devourers are capable of. I have watched them consume 14 of our most beautiful worlds, home to billions of my people. And I have seen what happens when someone finally fights back using methods they don't expect. He paused, his large eyes surveying the chamber. The humans didn't just defeat the Void Devourers at Thesha Prime. They did something we thought was impossible. They made the creatures retreat. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Devourers abandoned a feeding operation and fled from a battle. That alone should tell you something about the value of human military thinking. The Zalani ambassador shifted uncomfortably. Admiral Veltar, we sympathize with your losses, but accepting human tactics means accepting human methods. Are you prepared for the consequences of teaching the galaxy to fight like humans? Before Veltar could respond, alerts began sounding throughout the chamber. Emergency communication channels activated, and the voice of the Council's military coordinator filled the air. All delegates, we have received multiple distress calls from the hegemony border worlds. Long-range sensors are detecting Void Devourer fleets moving toward populated systems. Estimated time until first contact is 72 hours. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates began arguing among themselves in dozens of different languages. Some called for immediate evacuation of the threatened worlds. Others demanded conventional military response, and still others insisted that negotiation might still be possible. Sarah Chin stepped into the center of the chaos and raised her voice. Attention! The sheer force of command in her voice cut through the babble of alien languages, bringing the chamber to silence. In that moment, every delegate was reminded that they were in the presence of a predator species that had clawed its way to the stars from one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. Delegates, you have approximately 71 hours and 53 minutes to decide whether you want our help or not, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the chamber. But let me be very clear about something. Humanity will not stand by and watch genocide, regardless of what this council decides. We will respond to any distress call we receive, with or without your approval. She turned to address the chamber more broadly. You want to know if you can trust humans? Here's your answer. You can trust us to fight for innocent people, even if those people have spent 2 centuries trying to avoid us. You can trust us to use every weapon and tactic at our disposal to protect lives, even if our methods make you uncomfortable. And you can trust us to keep fighting until the threat is eliminated, no matter what the cost. The ancient delegate spoke again, their voice thoughtful. Admiral Chan, if we were to approve this joint task force, what would you require from us? Sarah had been preparing for this question since the moment they'd learned about the approaching Void Devourer fleets. Industrial capacity to build ships designed for the tactics we've developed. Scientific expertise to understand the enemy's biology and behavior. And, most importantly, unified command structure. Wars aren't won by committees, Elder. They're won by clear chains of command and the willingness to make hard decisions quickly. You're asking us to place galactic defense under human command, the Therion delegate observed. I'm asking you to place it under the command of the species that has actually defeated these things in battle, Sarah replied. If any of your militaries had successfully fought the Void Devourers, I'd be happy to serve under their command. But that's not the case. Admiral Veltar stood again, his voice carrying new strength. Honorable delegates, I have a question for each of you. How many of your people are you willing to sacrifice to avoid working with humans? Because that's what we're really discussing here. The Void Devourers are coming whether we're prepared or not. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Sarah had hoped but sufficient to authorize the joint task force. 26 species voted in favor, 18 against, with 3 abstentions. It wasn't unanimous support, but it was enough to begin building the unified force they would need. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, many stopping to speak with the human delegation, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 71 hours, they would face an enemy that had never been successfully defeated by conventional means. The galaxy was placing its trust in humanity's ability to fight and win against impossible odds. Looking at the tactical displays showing the approaching Void Devourer fleets, Sarah began planning humanity's next lesson in Deathworld warfare. This time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. This time, They would have the entire galaxy watching to see if the children of Earth could teach the universe how to survive against creatures that devoured worlds. The real war was just beginning, and Sarah Chun intended to show the galaxy exactly why other species had insisted on the neutral zone in the first place. Some lessons could only be taught through victory against impossible odds, and humanity had always been very good teachers. The combined fleet that assembled at the hegemony border was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Sleek Alteri science vessels flew alongside brutal human destroyers. Elegant Thurion cruisers maintained formation with heavily armed Kethmoran survivors who had volunteered for what many considered a suicide mission. In total, over 800 ships from 26 different species had answered the call to stand against the Void Devourers. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned flagship UES Unity, watching the tactical displays that showed 3 massive Void Devourer fleets approaching the border worlds of Kepler, 442, Trappist, 7, and Wolf, 359. Each enemy fleet contained over 100 of the massive creature ships, supported by thousands of smaller feeding vessels. "Final count, Admiral?" asked her new second-in-command, Admiral Veltar of the Kethmoran. The alien had requested assignment to the human flagship, claiming he wanted to learn human tactics firsthand. 347 Void Devourer ships of various sizes, Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the overwhelming odds. Intelligence estimates suggest a total biomass equivalent to consuming 17 inhabited worlds. Commander Hayes shook his head as he studied the sensor readings. They've been busy since Thesha Prime. These fleets are larger and more organized than anything we've faced before. Sarah nodded grimly. The Void Devourers had clearly learned from their defeat at Thesha Prime. Instead of attacking piecemeal, they were coordinating multiple fleets in a simultaneous assault designed to overwhelm any possible defense. Worse, their ships showed new adaptations, thicker hulls, redundant feeding systems, and what appeared to be improved regenerative capabilities. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Park from the tactical station, "we're receiving the final deployment reports from all Allied fleets. The Alteri have positioned their science vessels to monitor Void Devourer feeding patterns. The Thurion heavy cruisers are standing by to provide fire support. The Zilani are maintaining defensive screens around the civilian evacuation routes." Sarah surveyed the massive holographic display that dominated the Unity's bridge. The combined fleet was spread across 3 star systems, each group positioned to intercept one of the approaching enemy fleets. It was the largest military operation in galactic history, and its success or failure would determine whether the galaxy survived the next 24 hours. "All fleet commanders, this is Unity Actual," Sarah announced over the communication channels. "You all know what we're facing. The Void Devourers have never encountered unified resistance from multiple species. They've adapted to counter human tactics, but they haven't adapted to counter all of us working together." She paused, letting her words sink in across the diverse fleet. "Today we're going to teach them something new. We're going to show them what happens when the galaxy fights back." The first contact came at Kepler, 442, where Captain Torres, recently promoted after her heroic actions at Thesha Prime, commanded a mixed squadron of human destroyers and Kethmoran frigates. The Void Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of organic nightmares, their ships immediately beginning to feed on the system's outer planets. "Contact," Torres reported. "Void Devourer fleet is larger than expected. I count 123 vessels, with multiple new ship types we haven't seen before." Sarah watched the tactical feed as the alien ships moved into the system. The Void Devourers had clearly learned from Thesha Prime. They were maintaining tighter formations and appeared to have developed new defensive measures against kinetic weapons. "Torres, implement pattern Gamma 7, Sarah ordered. "Don't engage them directly. Make them come to you." Pattern Gamma 7 was a new tactic developed specifically for this engagement. Instead of trying to defeat the Void Devourers in direct combat, the Allied forces would use hit and run attacks to lure the creatures into carefully prepared kill zones. Torres's mixed squadron began executing a fighting withdrawal, firing kinetic rounds and energy weapons at extreme range while slowly retreating toward the inner system. The Void Devourers, apparently interpreting this as another conventional retreat, began pursuing in their typical feeding formation. What they didn't know was that the retreat was leading them directly into the most comprehensive trap ever laid by galactic civilization. Kepler Trap is armed and ready, reported Admiral Thekvar of the Alteri Science Fleet. Gravitational compression fields are stable and awaiting activation. The Alteri had contributed something unprecedented to the battle plan. Artificial gravity, well generators capable of creating localized space-time distortions. Combined with human kinetic weapons and their ion energy shields, they had created kill zones that would crush any ship unfortunate enough to enter them. As the Void Devourer fleet closed in on Torres's retreating forces, Sarah gave the order that would change galactic warfare forever. All science vessels, activate compression fields. All kinetic platforms, fire for maximum effect. All shield ships, prepare to contain the reaction. Space itself seemed to twist and buckle as the Alteri gravity generators activated. The pursuing Void Devourer ships found themselves caught in artificial gravity wells that compressed them, while thousands of kinetic rounds fired by human and allied vessels converged on their position. The effect was devastating. Creature ships that had survived the consumption of entire worlds were crushed and shredded in seconds. But the Void Devourers had learned to adapt quickly. The surviving ships immediately changed their tactics, spreading out to avoid the gravity traps and using their energy weapons to try to overload the field generators. Pattern Delta 9. Sarah ordered. Time for Phase 2. What happened next demonstrated the true power of unified galactic resistance. Their ion shield ships moved to protect the gravity generators while Kethmoran vessels used their superior speed to harass the scattered enemy forces. Meanwhile, human ships continued their kinetic bombardment, but now they were targeting not the Void Devourer ships themselves, but the space around them. The kinetic rounds detonated in precisely calculated patterns, creating debris fields and plasma clouds that disrupted the aliens' feeding processes. For the first time in their recorded history, the Void Devourers found themselves unable to absorb energy from their attacks. Every time they tried to feed, the environmental disruption interfered with their biological processes. Similar battles were raging at TRAPPIST-7 and Wolf 359, where other allied fleets implemented variations of the same strategy. The key was not to fight the Void Devourers on their terms, but to change the very nature of the battlefield. At Wolf 359, the Zalani contributed their mastery of defensive technology, creating shield barriers that prevented the Void Devourers from reaching any sources of energy they could feed on. Trapped between the barriers and under constant fire from human kinetic weapons, the alien ships began to show signs of starvation for the first time in galactic records. But the largest battle was taking place at TRAPPIST-7, where Admiral Chun herself led the main force against what appeared to be the primary Void Devourer fleet. This group included several enormous vessels that dwarfed even the largest ships they had encountered before, creatures the size of small moons with feeding tendrils that could reach across entire star systems. "My God," whispered Commander Hayes as the massive alien ships filled the main display. "How do we even begin to fight something that big?" Sarah's response was the smile of someone who had grown up on a world where the impossible was just another daily challenge. "The same way our ancestors killed whales, Hayes. Very carefully, and with lots of help." The battle plan for TRAPPIST-7 was the most complex military operation ever attempted. Instead of trying to destroy the massive Void Devourer ships, the Allied fleet would attack their feeding systems, the organic networks that allowed them to process consumed energy. Human ships armed with specialized cutting beams worked alongside Kethmoran vessels equipped with molecular disruptors to sever the feeding tendrils. Alteri science ships used gravity fields to create dead zones where the aliens couldn't process energy, and their ion-heavy cruisers provided covering fire to protect the smaller vessels during their attack runs. The battle lasted for 18 hours, with casualties mounting on both sides. The humans lost the destroyer UES Dauntless when its captain sacrificed his ship to sever a particularly large feeding tendril. The Kethmoran frigate Glory of Thesha was destroyed while covering a damaged Alteri science vessel. But for every Allied ship lost, dozens of Void Devourer feeding systems were severed or disrupted. Finally, the massive alien ships began to show signs of critical damage. Their bioluminescent patterns flickered and dimmed as they struggled to maintain basic life functions without their feeding networks. For the first time in their existence, the Void Devourers were starving in the middle of a battle. All ships, final phase, Sarah announced. Time to finish this. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. The starving Void Devourer ships, their regenerative abilities failing without access to energy sources, fell one by one to sustained kinetic bombardment from the Allied fleets. Ships that had seemed invincible hours before crumbled under weapons that would barely have damaged them at full strength. When the last Void Devourer ship finally stopped moving, the combined fleets found themselves victorious in a battle that most experts had considered unwinnable. But the cost had been enormous. Over 100 Allied vessels lost, thousands of crew members dead or missing, and several planetary systems damaged by the intense fighting. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Unity, looking out at the debris field that had once been the largest Void Devourer fleet ever assembled. Around her, representatives from dozens of species worked together to coordinate rescue operations and damage assessment. Admiral Veltar said quietly, "Sensor sweeps of the surrounding sectors show no additional Void Devourer activity. It appears we may have destroyed their primary invasion force." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "This was a major victory, but I doubt it's the end. Creatures this adaptive don't put all their resources in one place. There will be more out there, and they'll have learned from this defeat just like they learned from Thesha Prime." Commander Hayes approached their position, carrying a tactical report. "Ma'am, intelligence analysis suggests the Void Devourers have been operating in this galaxy for at least several thousand years. If they've survived this long, they probably have backup plans we haven't even considered." Sarah turned to address the bridge crew, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just led the largest military victory in galactic history. "Then, we'll be ready for them. Today we proved that the galaxy can fight back when we work together. Tomorrow we start building the defenses we'll need for the next time." She looked out at the mixed fleet of vessels from dozens of different worlds, each ship representing a species that had chosen to stand and fight rather than flee or hide. "Signal all ships. Job well done. And send a message to the Galactic Council. Humanity is officially requesting permission to establish permanent joint defense stations throughout Allied space. This war isn't over, but today we proved it's a war we can win." The Void Devourers had learned that the galaxy was no longer defenseless. They had faced the combined might of species that had spent millennia learning different ways to survive and fight. But, most importantly, they had encountered humanity, a species that had turned a death world into home, and then carried that death world mentality to the stars. The children of Earth had answered the call, and the galaxy would never be the same. The age of easy prey was over. The age of unified resistance had begun, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, other predators would have to learn to fear the species that had grown up fighting monsters far worse than anything the void could offer. The Deathworlder Armada had answered the SOS, and, against all odds, both the call for help and those who answered it had survived.